The public acceptance is arguably one of the most important factors in the adoption of innovative transportation technologies. But how do we exactly get the public on board? Let's turn to Riley Jarvis. Riley is a member of my team here at X Factor, communications coordinator, who will be facilitating our next session.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Muriel. As you mentioned, my name is Riley Jarvis, and I'll be moderating today's communications panel entitled No Roadblocks, How to Strategically Communicate Future-Focused Transportation Technologies. As Muriel mentioned, public acceptance is arguably the most important factors in the adoption of innovative transportation technologies. And if you've been participating in the previous sessions, you know that this belief was frequently reinforced by the other speakers. So how exactly do we get the public on board, pun intended? So let me go ahead and introduce our speakers for the panel this morning. We will start with Lisa Miller. Lisa is the Traveler Information and Outreach Growth Manager at the Utah Department of Transportation. She also acts as the Public Information Officer for the Traffic Management Division and interacts with local media during large-scale special events, severe weather, and for project updates. Lisa is responsible for ensuring that all traveler information disseminated from the Traffic Management Division is accurate and in real time, as well as educating and maintaining relationships internal to UDOT. Our next panelist, who y'all should be very familiar with at this point, is Muriel Xochimitl, who is the President and CEO of X Factor Strategic Communications, a full-service firm specializing in strategic communications, public relations, media relations, stakeholder facilitation, and grassroots public engagement. X Factor works with public sector clients in both the CAB and AAM industries. Prior to founding X Factor, Muriel worked as the Communications and Government Affairs Director for the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Utah's largest metropolitan planning organization, as well as a communications manager for the Utah Department of Transportation. Our next panelist is Linsey Willis, the Director of External Affairs for Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Linsey is responsible for directing communication, advocacy, and community engagement efforts in her role. Prior to joining the authority in 2013, Linsey spent 9 years leading marketing and communications initiatives and developing strategic partnerships for the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority. Finally, we have Rebecca Krawiec, the managing partner at Convey. Rebecca has over 20 years of combined experience in crafting communications for the transportation, flood control, architecture, engineering, and construction industries. Her degrees in speech communications and law are foundational to her experience as a skilled communicator and leader who values creative, collaborative problem solving to achieve maximum results. Rebecca's work involves extensive collaboration with local and state public agencies, such as the California Department of Transportation, also known as Caltrans, on transportation projects all over the San Francisco Bay Area. So with that, I will kick it over to Lisa to begin the presentation portion of this session. Before she takes over though, I do want to remind everyone tuning in that if you have any questions during the presentation portion, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we will get to those at the end. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Riley. And just logistics here, you can see my screen and you can hear me okay, and my slides are moving.
Yes, ma'am, looks good.
Wonderful, yes. Well, thanks Riley and Muriel, and thank you, Andy, for pretty much the perfect segue to this session. He talked a little bit in a couple of his answers about educating the public. And we have 4 panelists today that will take you on a short storytelling journey, really discussing that strategic communication of these focused transportation technologies. We talked yesterday and this morning quite a bit about a couple of things that I heard loud and clear. Number one, we need to deploy, and we need to know, we need to deploy what's tested and verified. That's definitely one way to make sure that this technology is going to be enhanced and embodied. This is here now. We are talking a lot about future focus, but this is not a pie in the sky, pun intended, future nugget that we're chasing. It's really here now, and it's the way of the future. And finally, pertaining specifically to this session, It's our responsibility to message to a diverse audience about the safety and mobility benefits of these technologies. UDOT's goals and quality of life is really something that's very front of mind for us here. And you heard from Carlos, Blaine, Chris, and Jared yesterday and today about these vision and mission statements and how we incorporate this in all of our projects at UDOT. This is really focused on quality of life and a safe multimodal transportation system, especially when it comes to CAV and urban air mobility. There's so much happening in this space, and I was really happy to find this HNTB brochure from 2018. There was a survey. The data was really interesting, but the piece of it that I really enjoyed the most was the delivery of the info. We are really a data-rich organization here at UDOT and a data-rich industry in general with all of the transportation data that we have. But it's very graphically interesting and really kind of helps us to tell this story about where we are with this market penetration and deployment of connected, automated, and urban air mobility. The data showed a variety of different opinions on AV use. It also showed that about half of Americans feel that AVs are not safe when they're driven by humans. And the caveat usually these days is the millennials disagree with every other age group. About 54% of millennials believe that AV driving is safe. But that's really something that we have to pay very close attention to when we're going out and when we're messaging for these types of projects. I'm going to borrow a statement from my colleague Blaine Leonard. He said it many times. This isn't going to be the flip of a switch, and we're not going to have a world fully integrated tomorrow with all of these connected vehicles, automated vehicles. It's really going to be gradual, and citizens will become more comfortable with it over time as they see it out on the roadways and as they start to trust it more. That adoption curve and the fact that we'll be living in a mixed deployment landscape for essentially the rest of our lives is really something that's kind of hard to message. A lot of companies are taking kind of the lead on this right now and trying out these self-delivery vehicles. We've heard a lot about package delivery drones and things like that over the course of this morning and yesterday. And it's really something that's going to be appearing on our landscape kind of piecemeal here and there as we do pilot deployments and other types of testing. How does that matter when it comes to communicating for all of these projects? We need to really know our citizens and our audiences. And our citizens in Utah, for example, could be much different than citizens in other parts of the country, California, Arizona, Michigan, Pittsburgh, where there's a lot of this kind of discussion going on already. Muriel will talk in a minute about legislative audiences, and one of many important audiences that are interested in this space is the legislative. But we did focus groups in late 2018 at UDOT, really to get a baseline for what our population is feeling about connected and automated vehicles. And it's really interesting to see the sentiment change, especially after the deployment of the AV shuttle project that Chris Sirakis talked about yesterday. Surveying your public is a very good way to get that baseline information in addition to focus groups. But the focus group questions and survey questions can be similar from year to year, which really helps to give you that good baseline and determine how sentiment has changed. I'll talk a little bit more about the focus group data that we received in a minute, and it was really interesting from the beginning to the end of the focus group how sentiment kind of changed. And spoiler alert, it usually goes up, it went down in our focus group. Now, I'd love to add some transportation technology, CAV, urban air mobility questions to this UDOT annual survey sometime really soon, maybe in the next year or two, just so we can get a baseline for how that information is changing. If we could take a quick minute, and Riley, maybe you can help me out with this. I'd love to know if you have experienced an automated vehicle or taken a ride on an automated vehicle. If you could, maybe raise your hand and type into the chat box where you rode that vehicle. Was it a pilot? Was it on a college campus? Was it at a hospital location? Was it kind of a novelty situation at a special event? I'm really kind of excited, and maybe Riley, you could help us. I'm seeing a handful of hands raised here. Great. Sarah, Dylan, Clint. Yep, I'm seeing a good handful of hands raised here. I'm really interested. If you guys can type into the chat box, let us know where you experienced that automated vehicle. And then maybe in advance of our question and answer session a little bit later, how did you feel when you were on that shuttle? Think for a minute if you were with your family. Family members that don't work in the field of transportation, did you feel safe? How would you tell your story about your experience with this vehicle? And I'm guessing that it probably wouldn't be with Gantt charts or big data sets or spreadsheets. Maybe it would be with pictures. Maybe it would be with maps. I'm sure it would probably include some sort of descriptors and adjectives like it was slow, I felt comfortable, I was nervous, I was excited. You know, there's a lot of different kind of descriptors that can go into this and really help us to make a better case for this technology integrated into our transportation landscape. Our friends at USDOT and Federal Highway Administration have published some really good guidance on pretty much all things CAV, UAM, and I like to reference these documents for consistency and also kind of reapplying the graphics that are in those documents, because why reinvent the wheel if we don't have to? There's a lot going on in this space. The UDOT Transportation Technology Group does have a new website, and I'll tell you all now, and then I'll type it into the chat box at the end here. It's transportationtechnology.utah.gov. And there's a lot of information on the website about project descriptions, reports that really help to tell our story to all of the diverse audiences that we serve in Utah. Our 5 pillars for the UDOT Transportation Technology Group, you see here on the right side of your screen. And on the very bottom, I'm really proud that outreach and growth is one of the high level pillars that essentially our program is founded on. Of course, we have the technology advancement and the deployments and collaboration with a variety of different groups, as well as the very important policy and legislation. But if we raise outreach to the prominence of something like policy and legislation, it's because if the public doesn't understand it or trust it, they won't fund it and they won't use it. And I really want that on my headstone, my tombstone when I die. So somebody please make that happen. It's really an important consideration though. During the focus groups, the opinion, as I mentioned, usually goes up. And you can see on the left side of your screen here that because the participants in our focus group were essentially educated. When we started the focus group, we said to them, how do you feel about connected and automated vehicle technology? And they kind of went, we don't even know what that is. Does it mean that my car has Bluetooth? Not really. We got kind of a handful of yeses, a handful of no's, some thumbs up, some thumbs down. Over the course of the focus group, we had the ability through the questions that we were asking and the moderator's involvement to really educate the participants. And as a result, they were much less supportive of it at the end. And a drop from 5.52 to 4.89 might not look like a whole lot, but keep in mind, this is based on a scale of 0 to 7. So that's a pretty big percentage. People were just very skeptical once they left those focus groups. And that was a really good opportunity for us to understand how people are feeling and where we can message and have the most impact. When do you need a strategic communications plan? I have a feeling Linsey and Rebecca are going to talk a little bit more about this with their Innovate 680 project, but larger projects may need a robust strategic plan like our automated shuttle project, and others may just need some general guidelines. At UDOT, we use this project outreach planner that's typically more for capacity or general projects that we have, but it's a really great resource to be able to manage and apply how you're going to be doing outreach for these connected vehicle projects. Within each strategic planner outline, there are strategies that are focused on project goals, and then there are specific objectives, strategies, and tactics underneath those strategies. And this press release from our autonomous shuttle pilot project is a great example of the output from the AV shuttle project. One of our strategies was really get this in front of the people, get people to experience this, have citizens experience the shuttle. Media availability was a very important strategy for us. And being effective with media, if anyone on the chat today has done that, without kind of wearing out your welcome or sounding like a broken record, is really hard to do, especially with a project like this that was over the course of about 18 months in Utah. We had a great public involvement consultant support for this massive AV project. And Chris talked about the value of branding, especially with two different agencies working together. And a brief side note here, there's really nothing that matches with UDOT blue and orange and UTA blue and red. There are just no colors that match that. So we kind of had a hard job cut out for us from the get-go. Part of the deployment for the automated shuttle was a University of Utah trust deployment study. And this wasn't something that was done in conjunction with the U of U engineering. It was actually done in conjunction with the psychology department. And essentially there was an operator you see in the center of your screen here. That's Nate, and he's wearing project branded clothing. He has the automated shuttle control joystick around his neck and fully visible to the rider. For this trust development study, we essentially put him in a backpack and plain clothes, and he hit that joystick control in a camera bag. People on the shuttle did not know that Nate was the operator. They thought he was just a casual rider just like them. There were several interesting findings, and the report is available for download on our Transportation Technology Group website under the What We're Learning tab. There were lots of lessons learned and input from really influential and engaged leadership, like our then Lieutenant Governor, now Governor Spencer Cox. And the report findings from the automated vehicle pilot project hit on nearly every panel and session within this peer exchange. It's a really lengthy document. We discussed policy, access, and equality for citizens and for communities, the landscape of deployment and maybe some constraints around those deployment constraints, public opinion, and then of course, readiness and research. It's a really good document. If you're curious about this space, feel free to check it out. UDOT also has several other exciting projects coming up. We are partnering with Panasonic and the city of Orem on a connected vehicle concentrated deployment that's going to be kicking off mostly this fall. And we're also working on a work zone connected vehicle data exchange. UDOT was one of several cities and municipalities across the nation that were selected by the Federal Highway Administration to participate in that. So stay tuned. And once again, please head to our website if you have any questions on that. At the end of the day, and before I kick it off to Linsey, Rebecca, and Muriel, this is where we're at. Take a look at the sentiment and the feelings that people have about this technology. What words should be phased out? What words need to be bigger? Are there any words that are missing on here? Linsey and Rebecca and Muriel will be talking about a case study and policy outreach and some of the sentiments that they're seeing. I will end now and turn it over to Linsey and Rebecca.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. There was also a ton of movement in the chat, so if you want to check that out. I will pass the torch over to Muriel, who will be taking over the next portion of the presentations. So Muriel?
Perfect. Thank you, Riley. Okay, perfect. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So we are at an exciting inflection point in human history. I mean, advanced air mobility will play a transformative role in revolutionizing the way we get around, because mobility affects all of us, right? With our transportation systems being some of the most enduring aspects of our communities and society. For example, here in Utah, some of the major current road corridors we have are actually former horse and buggy routes of the early settlers. As we take our transportation system vertical, like, how do we secure public acceptance of this new paradigm without the public feeling like we're going over their heads, unintended? So it's taken about 100 years for each of the previous industrial revolutions, right? So the first revolution, historical scholars generally think occurred in the mid 1700s with mechanization led by the steam engine. 100 years later, you have the second industrial revolution, where mechanization was leveraged to induce mass production, driven by electricity and oil-based power. Fast forward 100 more years, and the third revolution really happened when you automated that mass production with electronics and information technologies. But today, we are in what some folks have dubbed the fourth industrial revolution. This is a way of describing the blurring of boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. It's a fusion of advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, genetic engineering, quantum computing, and other technologies. So how does advanced air mobility kind of fit into this new paradigm? And again, how do we seek public acceptance? Well, I find this chart to be fairly fascinating. This shows the technology adoption in US households over the 20th century and beyond. And really what's to note here, and some of you have may seen a chart like this before, is that as you get kind of into more modern history, you have a steeper curve, which connotes faster adoption of those technologies. Think, of course, like cell phones and things like that. So nowadays, we actually have a whole generation of digital natives that have grown up with a supercomputer literally in their pockets and at their fingertips, right? So how do we kind of take advantage of the generational changes to accelerate these types of adoptions as it relates to advanced air mobility? I love to quote this quote of Henry Ford, right? He had said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. We all kind of reference back to what we know, our context. What have we understood, kind of our paradigm of the world? And then, we incrementally innovate from there. So when it comes to a more transformative technology like AAM, really the sphere of the unknown will be a significant challenge in seeking public acceptance. People are driven by our emotions, right? We like to pride ourselves on being, rational beings, but at the end of the day, we largely can be driven by our emotions, and the sphere of the unknown can drive significant resistance to change. But as Lisa had mentioned, technology is already here. If you get on a commercial flight, I'm sure any of the pilots that are participating with us today might take issue with this, but that plane kind of flies itself, right? It is, fairly automated already. And so, we already have a lot of these kind of technologies that we use on a regular basis. And, how do we kind of build that into our communications efforts in explaining to the public what's coming next? I think it's really important, again, to kind of put things into context. So I love this slide because, it shows back in 1903, that's when the Wright brothers discovered flight. It took thousands of years of human history to get to that point. And then 66 years later, and we're on the moon, right? So it really just kind of shows that acceleration of technology. And now we're here talking about low altitude flight in an urban environment. One of our clients at X Factor is a state-funded nonprofit called Deseret UAS. Deseret UAS was co-founded by 2 semi-rural counties in Utah with forward-thinking elected leadership who saw a vision to take advantage of a fast-growing yet nascent AAM industry. The organization's mission is to facilitate economic opportunity through the advancement of air mobility, and they provide a safe and legal test environment for large UAM companies seeking to operationalize their technologies. Here you see at one of their warehoused facilities, an aircraft from the company XTI. This is meant to be essentially a passenger drone for business executives to take from region to region. It's not fully operational just yet, but we had an opportunity to host them at our facilities and help them with some of their initial testing. So what kind of world do we want, right? I love this juxtaposition. Obviously, the Jetsonian future is kind of something that has bounced around a lot in AAM circles. And then on the right, this is a screenshot from Fifth Element, right? A dystopian kind of future where flying cars are running rampant. Likely our future isn't at either of these 2 extremes where you have kind of a happy, 1960s family, flying their own car, or, this dystopian future. But, these are things that, for better or worse, the public thinks about when we start saying the words air taxiing flying cars. So we need to keep that in mind and meet people where they're at. What are some of those concerns? So in our research, we have learned a few things through kind of qualitative and quantitative research, surveying and focus groups. A few kind of themes rose to the top. Safety, of course, being first and foremost. I love the fact that in aviation, we have a near 100% safety record, right? That sounds great, but there's kind of a general distrust of automated or autonomous technologies by the public, and folks are really concerned about their safety when it comes to getting into one of these passenger drones, for example. So we definitely need to overcome some of those concerns and make sure that we are working with folks early on and frequently in addressing those. Privacy also a concern for voyeurism or the use of cameras, or people are worried about having these types of vehicles flying like literally over their backyard. So how do we set up a transportation system to kind of mitigate those concerns? Jobs, as with other kind of 4th industrial revolution era technologies, AAM could be a bit disruptive in the job market. And so workforce training becomes kind of a critical component to this. We've also learned that the public is very concerned about environmental impacts, battery life. I've had folks, ask me, hey, is this going to block out the sun? And what about the birds? Are we killing birds? So again, something that we'll need to kind of proactively address. And of course, noise. Folks, when they hear vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, think helicopters and a lot of noise, which of course we know is not the case. It won't be that noisy, but when you start to talk about vertiports sited in local communities, any noise beyond kind of baseline scenarios now, does create some concerns. I also wanted to bring up equity because I think it underpins all of these concerns. I think we can all remember where we were when we saw that video of George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," right? And that sparked historic protests around the world. It was particularly poignant during a time of civil unrest in a once-in-a-century global pandemic that really had brought to the fore some of these systemic inequalities that we have seen in our communities. And infrastructure on the ground historically has contributed to disproportionate impacts to underserved and minority communities. So how can we really take advantage of AAM technologies and CAV technologies as well at this kind of inflection point in human history to ensure that we can right some of those wrongs of the past and that we can ensure equitable access to everyone. So, one of the things that will be very essential in our communications efforts is, as communications professionals, we're not the technical experts. I always joke that I know enough about, enough to be dangerous about a lot of things. And so, I really rely on, many of our participants here today, right, as subject matter experts who can help us understand where the market is going and then better communicate that. So it's my understanding that, there is a market, for first responder type applications of advanced air mobility. I mean, think about the game-changing opportunities if we can, get to a crash much more quickly and essentially life flight a person out of the scene, or even perhaps bring a medical professional directly on the scene via an air taxi. That literally has life-changing implications. So what are some of the benefits and how do we communicate those in seeking public acceptance of AAM? Improving public services. This will be a critical component, again, as we just saw with the previous slide, the provision of emergency services. Reductions in traffic congestion. Now, I think, we need to be very intentional in how we adopt AAM technologies to ensure that we aren't just, replicating what's on the ground up in the air. We need to make sure, because that is a public concern, right? Are we just putting, the concerns of traffic congestion now up in the air? So how do we kind of proactively plan for a future vertical transportation system where, we can alleviate some of the existing on the ground congestion while not replicating congestion in the air? Supporting fiscal sustainability. I think this is a very resonant message, particularly with policymakers and elected officials. When you look comparatively speaking at the billions and even trillions of dollars, right, nationwide that historically we've invested in our ground-based infrastructure, that's all very important. But when you go vertical, it's relatively, when you're looking at trillions of dollars invested on the ground, almost for free, right? There's definitely some costs associated with advanced air mobility, but the benefits can substantially outweigh those marginal costs. Facilitating a robust economy. When you look at the technological advances that we've had so far, they really seek to advance economic opportunity. And, I think AAM will be a critical part of a future economy. And then let's turn that notion on its head of impacts to the environment. And again, being very intentional in our policies to protect the environment. Battery technology is much more clean and green, which we have seen we'll need more of as we deal with the detrimental impacts of climate change. Just a couple parting thoughts. So we need to make sure that, as Lisa mentioned, we are identifying the various audience groups that we'll be working with, and community is key. Zoning, infrastructure, and revenue are critical components that local cities and counties will need to be mindful of. And historically, the FAA, for example, really hasn't, to a finer degree, had to work so closely with cities on, advanced air mobility. And so what does that look like? How, from a land use perspective, do we zone? What does that look like in cities' general plans for vertiport siting or vertipads? Infrastructure, what type of infrastructure would be needed? And then how is revenue generated? Do we do taxes or permitting or fees? And then what does that look like with the broader community fabric? How is AAM integrated? These are all really important questions. I will leave with just one large scale example. A client of X Factors is the state of Utah. This is a state-owned current prison site in Utah, dubbed The Point. It's dubbed The Point because it's right at the point of the mountain, the convergence of the two most populous counties in Utah, Salt Lake and Utah counties. It's 600 acres of pretty much what will be a blank slate once the current inmates at the prison move to a new correctional facility next year. The state of Utah just released what they're calling the framework plan for the point, and you're seeing a conceptual rendering of that framework plan here. So while not currently illustrated, a potential integration of AAM on the site is being contemplated. And as a communications professional, working with the state of Utah on this site, I feel a weighty responsibility to ensure that we have robust participation by Utahns through the entire process to make sure we're literally and figuratively laying the groundwork for public acceptance should AAM be integrated into the site in the future. And I have to say that, Utahns have really responded. We've had about 10,000 Utahns engage with us during the visioning and planning processes for the site. And a lot of that robust input is reflected here. So what a lot of folks have told us kind of in this area where it's a narrow geographic bottleneck that's already experiencing a lot of traffic congestion is they want this site to be sustainable. They want it to be future focused, leveraging innovative technologies, mitigating negative externalities associated with our significant growth here in Utah, like taking advantage of innovative transportation technologies to reduce congestion in the area. So it's a perfect kind of case example of what could be and kind of that art of the possible. And we're excited to kind of see the possibilities. So just to end, the sky's no longer the limit. Really changing that human perspective will take time, but given the quickened pace of technological adoption, I really do think AAM will take off, literally and figuratively. And it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we are working with the public to address their concerns proactively and to really make for a better world. Safe, affordable, accessible, convenient, and equitable. I would say those are the key themes that we should keep top of mind in engaging with the public. And with that, Riley, I'll turn it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Muriel, for providing your insights on how to proactively address some of these public concerns that may come about with the integration of transportation technologies. With that, I will pass it over to Linsey and Rebecca, who will be wrapping up the presentation portion of this session.
Hi, Riley. This is Linsey. I actually can't start my video, so I don't know if that's something you can do for me. And oh, there we go. Thank you. Can everyone see me now? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Linsey Willis. I'm the Director of External Affairs for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and we're really excited to be here today. Thank you, UDOT, for the invitation to be part of this. For those of you who have no idea where Contra Costa County is, it's an eastern suburb of San Francisco. We're home to about 1.2 million people, and the Contra Costa Transportation Authority is the planning and congestion management agency for the county. And today we're really excited to give you an update on our behavior science study. It's part of our Innovate 680 effort. And just to give you a little context, Innovate 680 is a series of 6 projects designed to create an integrated and connected corridor along Interstate 680, which forms kind of the north to south spine or backbone of our county. There's a 26-mile stretch that runs straight through the middle of Contra Costa County. And there is no physical space to widen this corridor anymore at this point. And because of that, it's become really congested as Contra Costa becomes a destination as folks move out to the suburbs, and congestion has continued to rise on this corridor year after year. And just to give you an idea, kind of pre-pandemic, the average drive delay was about 90 minutes on this corridor to get through. So we've reached a point where we can't physically widen this corridor anymore, and we need to turn to technology to provide some solutions for how we can better move people and goods along this corridor. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of kind of what those 6 projects are that encompass Innovate 680. The first one is part-time transit lanes, which is enabling buses to use the shoulder during peak periods to bypass congestion. We also have an express lane completion project, which is completing a toll road segment, which is free to carpoolers in the northbound direction on Interstate 680. We're also working on shared mobility hubs, which are converting kind of dated park and ride lots to be neighborhood transit hubs where folks can access car share or autonomous vehicles or scooters, multiple modes for them to get where they need to go or connect to transit. We're also working on advanced technology, which is, providing folks real-time information based on real-time traffic data that can help folks make decisions in a really dynamic fashion. Part of this project are also 2 grants that we received from the U.S. Department of Transportation. The first is Mobility on Demand, or Mobility as a Service, which is creating an app that will allow people to plan, pay for, and receive rewards for their trips. And we're also working on an automated driving systems project, which will actually bring a shared autonomous vehicle to Rossmore, a senior community in our county, coming in 2023, to let those folks actually experience it and ride it. The average age in this community is 78. And so there's a lot of need for alternative forms of transit. So we're really excited to roll that out. And we're also looking at how we can use these vehicles in coordination with some of our hospitals as well. So as you can guess, this project is really unique in many ways, and that kind of extends to the way we're trying to engage the public and learn how they use the corridor and try to actually shift their behavior to maybe use the corridor in a different way that they have in the past. We have a lot of data about this corridor: origin, destination, average speed, average delays, a lot of the data points that many of you are familiar with. But what we're really trying to understand is why people use the corridor the way they do. And that's kind of the underpinning of this behavior science effort, is in order to achieve the mode shift and meet the greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled goals that the state of California has imposed on us, we're trying to figure out how we can design the different elements of this project to remove the challenges or remove the barriers that folks perceive when we ask them to get out of their single occupant vehicle. So I'm really excited to introduce to you this morning Rebecca Krawiec with Convey, Inc. They are partnering with CCTA on this project, and Rebecca is the public engagement lead, and she's going to dive into some of the findings from our recent survey.
Thank you, Linsey. Can everyone hear me also? Hopefully, okay, great. So as Linsey mentioned, for the Innovate 680 program, we engaged in a behavior science research study, and it's been really exciting research. And today we're going to take a deeper dive into some specific data to share with you. Before we do that, I just want to go into just a little bit of an overview of the whole research program as a whole. So first of all, there were kind of 3 key deliverables for this research. The first one being landscape analysis phase, where we reviewed a lot of available national and international research to learn what's already known on some of the topics important to Innovate 680. Then we started a behavior drivers analysis phase, and that's where the survey I'm going to talk about today, that's where that fits in. And that's really designed to sort of fill in any gaps that were part of that landscape analysis research. And then finally, we're developing some recommendations and interventions to work with our project teams and encourage mode shift in each of those projects that Linsey just mentioned. So that first deliverable was really important. We completed 6 landscape analysis reports, which helped us identify those gaps and helped us formulate our user analysis survey. And this survey was specifically designed for the Innovate 680 program to collect detailed transportation data. And as I mentioned, it filled those gaps that we found in our landscape analysis phase. So I'm going to quickly run through some methodology points that might be of interest to all of you. First of all, we used an address-based sampling system, which involved mailing invitations to a random selection of 50,000 households along the Interstate 680 corridor and within a desired radius of that corridor. Our survey was offered online and in print and in multiple languages. It took approximately 20 minutes to complete, and it covered multiple topics. I want to point out that one of the strengths and differentiators of this study is our ability to dig into the psychological components of people's thoughts and feelings. And I loved hearing Lisa and Muriel kind of touch on that as well. It really is important, and we were really happy to be able to achieve some and gather some of that information. Our goal was to get 1,500 completed surveys, and we reached that goal in early January 2021. We were also really excited to see that of our survey respondents, 1,000 of them agreed to be contacted in the future, and 950 of that 1,000 agreed to link their survey data to future travel data. So this data linking is really key in that it's going to help us demonstrate the success of our efforts to encourage mode shift. At the end of the survey, respondents were given a chance to provide feedback, and most of what we received was very positive. In general, we found that corridor residents are really excited to be participating in the future of transportation. Now, just a few key demographics. So first, our respondents were well distributed among male and female, and the ages of our respondents were mostly over the age of 35. The majority of our respondents were homeowners, with the average home having roughly 2 of everything: 2 people, 2 smartphones, 2 cars, and 2 driver's licenses. Taking a broader look at the smartphone ownership, our survey showed that 97% of corridor residents owned a phone and 92% own a phone countywide. Now that we've covered some intro information about the survey and its respondents, we want to take a deeper dive into our key audiences. That first one being those 70% of corridor residents that use the Interstate 680 corridor once per week or more. This is quite a broad category that we're going to be narrowing into a smaller group just a little bit later in the presentation. But for this audience, we learned that the most used mode pre-COVID was driving alone in a personal vehicle. Now, we want to note that respondents were asked to select all modes that were used pre-COVID. So while driving alone in a personal vehicle was the most popular mode, it certainly wasn't the only mode. Now, of those people who drive alone, it was pleasing to see that 68%, so the 2 far right bars added together, are at least somewhat interested in driving less. And when we asked why they are interested in driving less, concern for the environment ranked highest, followed closely by not wanting to sit in traffic and reducing stress. We also asked people to write any possible perceived benefit that they could think of to using alternative modes. And then we coded those answers into the categories that you see here. And again, environmental impact ranked higher than others. We also asked those who are not interested in driving less why they're not interested. And I want to quickly draw attention to the ranking in the third circle from the left, that 32% who don't see a way to drive less. This was an interesting correlation to another stat that's on my next slide. And here we have people who are interested in driving less also feeling that it's not possible for them. So you can see it's a third here, which is very similar to the percentage shown for the other group. So with that, it was just interesting to see that there's similar perceived abilities around this topic for both groups. Here are some quick comments submitted by our survey takers about why they believe it's not possible for them to take alternative modes. And I do want to point out just that the acronym BART on this slide stands for Bay Area Rapid Transit, and that's our Bay Area train system. This slide confirms from a motivation perspective that between our larger group of corridor residents and then that smaller group of people who are interested in driving less, that really saving money isn't the biggest factor or motivator. Saving time is actually a bigger motivator when it comes to taking alternative modes. So now that we've explored that larger 70% target audience, we want to turn to a narrower audience that we might have the most success with behavior change and mode shift. And we've given this high priority audience a fun name. We're calling them our champions of change. And these are daily drivers on the corridor who are interested in driving less. And this high impact group makes up 44% of all of our corridor drivers. So the next few slides will be about this champion group. So with this group isolated, we're able to focus a little bit more on how to achieve actual mode shift. So we narrowed our questions a bit and asked ourselves what modes could yield the most new users and what modes would yield the least. So we asked our champions about their likelihood of using some new and alternative modes, and here is how they answered. So regarding the modes that they are most likely to try, we see that telecommuting and carpooling with the household ranked highest, but private bus, shuttle, BART, public bus, and rail following closely behind. The modes that our champions are least likely to try include bike share and van pool. We also explored what percentage of our champions have used alternative modes at least some of the time in the past. So that could just be one time, for example. We think that we can work with this group to maintain and increase their use of each of these modes, because we understand it's not just important to get brand new users to alternative modes, but we also want to encourage existing users or those who are over that kind of first ride hurdle to use it more frequently or continue their use. So finally, among our champions, we were curious about the perceived barriers to using alternative modes. We also wanted to see how that looked against that interested driver category, which is the one we highlighted earlier in the deck. And you can see here that the most popular barriers, or the ones that are the most concerning to both groups, the champions and the interested drivers, are availability of that mode and travel quality. And then the barriers that ranked lowest, and interestingly, the ones that were highest were both around that 40% mark, and the ones that are less concerning all kind of rank right around 10%. And you can see that there's 4 of those barriers there. And again, it was the same for both categories or both audiences. So just to summarize our champion analysis, we've calculated that if we can get our champions to cut their driving in half, we could reduce the number of drivers on the road by 22%. And that translates into a reduction of roughly 37,000 cars per day. We know that this is pretty aspirational. Like, as a group, we understand that. And Linsey and I like to joke that it's kind of like getting a toddler to eat a salad like 3 days a week, right? We're asking people to maybe get out of their car 2 or 3 days a week. But we feel like any change in that direction will really help us achieve Innovate 680 goals. So that segues nicely into our final presentation section, where I'm just going to give a snapshot of how our research is informing some of our Innovate 680 projects. And I'm just going to focus on 3 for today, but there's a lot of information that we're exploring for all 6 of our projects. So first of all, for that Shared Mobility Hubs project, we learned that nearly half of corridor residents combine different modes of transportation for a single trip prior to COVID. And this project is designed to make combining those modes easier. So we learned that many of our audience members are very interested in the concept of hubs, and that they're willing to walk or bike a certain amount. They value frequent and reliable service, but they definitely have concerns about security, and that's really important to them. So these are all things, just examples of things that our project teams are working to incorporate into the project plans. And from a communications perspective, we're really going to focus on communicating quality of service to people who are interested in using the hubs. So we're more likely to get actual usage of the hubs in the future. We also asked potential transit riders what features they're most interested in, and the top 3 were free Wi-Fi, comfortable seating, and power outlets. So by adding and advertising these features to our target audiences, we can increase transit ridership and persuade people out of their cars. And then finally, our automated driving systems project was one that Linsey highlighted earlier as well. And a key cornerstone element to this is autonomous shuttles. And we learned that a really large percentage of people are interested in using AV shuttles when they become available. But there are concerns like wait times and safety. So in order for us to take advantage of this really impressive interest level, we'll certainly be doing things like demonstrations and showing people that it's safe and that the wait times aren't long, and getting people over that first ride hurdle. So finally, just to close, I want to share some information about how we're keeping the lines of communication open with our key audiences. So first, we recently sent a thank you email to all of the survey takers. And with that email, we provided a multi-page, really beautifully graphically enhanced summary of the survey results, because we thought it would be really important to share with them what we learned and, again, thank them for their participation. And then also, we've continued our relationship with that 1,000 that agreed to be contacted in the future by recruiting some of those folks to help us do some testing of an app that we're developing for the Mod Moss project. So we feel that, really this survey provided so much great information to us, but beyond that, it provided a really great opportunity for us to connect with the public, learn about those audiences, create some bonds, and we hope to continue using these relationships to help Innovate 680 be a very successful program in the end. And with that, I'm happy to open it up to questions, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Rebecca and Linsey, for sharing what you guys are doing with public engagement in the California Bay Area. We have about 4 minutes left of this session, so we will start with one question for all of you. So as strategic communications professionals working in the realm of transportation, what does success look like for you? And I will have Rebecca start first, since your presentation is most top of mind.
Thank you so much. That's an excellent question. I think success to me, especially in regards to the Innovate 680 program, is to find people using this technology in the future. We know that there's interest, so we hope to take advantage of that interest, do a great job educating and instructing people how to use the technology, and then ultimately enjoy some mode shift in the Bay Area.
Great. Linsey, do you have anything else to add?
I think just adding to that, my definition of success is having this ongoing relationship with our constituents. Many times when we, as planning agencies, as transportation agencies, we're really involved with the public when we're talking about a single project or a certain planning effort. And then when that effort ends, we tend to be a little quieter in our communities. And so one of the things that we're really trying to focus on as an agency is really having sustained engagement with the public, even when there may not be a project that directly impacts their neighborhood, but just keeping them informed. As Lisa, Muriel, and Rebecca indicated, education is such a cornerstone of helping people understand, where their tax dollars are going and the value that they're getting out of their system. And I think, making sure that we're continuing to share information all the time is really important.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lisa, do you have anything else to add to that?
Sure, I'll build on what Linsey just said. I think in a nutshell, really educating and informing is a very good way to determine success. If you have any metrics that you're applying to your projects, make sure you can determine if sentiment is changing. And kind of the overall theme of our whole session today was that strategy piece of it. This isn't something that you kind of just come up with at the 11th hour. You really have to be very integrated and very purposeful with your outreach and your growth and communications for your projects.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. Thank you. Muriel, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that?
Just reiterating what's already been said, building that relationship and the two-way ongoing dialogue with the public is so key in building trust. I think success would look like having the public understand and be on board with the plans for adoption of these technologies so that we're not behind the curve where the technology is fast pacing our ability to understand it and make sure we've got that acceptance by the public.
Perfect. Well, thank you, ladies. I wish we had more time to get deeper into this discussion because it is very important, but we're at the top of the hour. So if you have any additional questions, we will add everyone's emails to the chat so you can reach out to them directly. With that, just want to thank you guys again for participating, and we will turn the time back over to Muriel.